So with that, we are almost on time for the last set of public comments of the day. We have 5 commenters. Reminder, 5 minutes, and I'll give you a 30-second warning. You could also look at the lights. Our first commenter is Julian Lamb from the University of California, San Francisco.
Thank you very much. My name is Julian Lamb from the University of California at San Francisco. Prior to my time at UCSF, I've been there for about 3 years now. I was an assistant scientist at Johns Hopkins University, and prior to that, I completed an ORISE fellowship at the EPA in the Office of Policy. 5 minutes is obviously not a lot of time, especially when it's very strictly enforced. So even though I speak very quickly, obviously I will take advantage of what I am assuming is unlimited unwritten comments. So we will take the opportunity to submit those to the committee at a very soon later date. I appreciate the opportunity to be here to provide oral comments to the committee in consideration as they review EPA IRIS's program, which by now I think we have all heard throughout the very long day that they're a very important independent group that develops chemical toxicity assessments and provides scientific expertise to evaluate potential health hazards that EPA, other federal agencies, states, regions, tribes, communities, and international agencies have come to rely upon. EPA's commitment to scientific independence and integrity is essential, and the continued support of the IRIS program in its current placement within ORD is a critical component to ensuring its ability to maintain this commitment and support of EPA's mission to protect public health. The NIS has reviewed the IRIS program several times, which we've heard a few times today. In its most recent 2014 report, reflected very favorably among the significant and recent modifications that IRIS had accomplished to its scientific, technical, and general processes. The committee noted that a significant driver of these beneficial changes in such a short period of time was due to IRIS's adoption and implementation of systematic review methodology. Systematic reviews, applied and empirically demonstrated predominantly in the clinical sciences for many decades, are conducted according to a predefined protocol that ensures a comprehensive identification of relevant literature, transparent and rigorous assessment of individual studies, and synthesis of the evidence using appropriate tools and methods for the types of data being combined. Systematic review methods are important because they promote transparency, scientific rigor, they provide a comprehensive review of all the relevant data, and they serve as a means to identify and reduce bias in research. Although it doesn't completely eliminate the need for subjective expert opinions, it does offer a transparent framework for the documentation and the transparency of decisions that are made during the assessment. IRIS is committed to applying systematic review methodology to its chemical assessments, and we at UCSF wholeheartedly support and commend their efforts thus far in this regard. As highlighted by a recent September 2017 review by EPA's Scientific Advisory Board, IRIS should be commended for its approach to systematic review that adheres to scientific best practices. And by that, I mean a lot of things that IRIS is not doing, and we highly recommend that they continue not doing these things, including incorporating appropriate evaluations of study of risk of bias that do not falsely assume superiority of guideline studies or GLP standards, do not utilize numerical scoring of reporting quality, which we've heard several times today from IRIS, and we definitely appreciate that, or incorporate inappropriate approaches that are modeled after the CLIMISH or TOXR tool. These approaches have been long criticized as limiting and inappropriate, and were they to be adopted in IRIS assessments, they would threaten the quality and the relevance of resulting chemical assessments and subsequently public health protection. Because there are some offices and groups across the agency that have been either implementing or discussing adoption of these types of approaches, we also strongly recommend that the IRIS program and its framework approach for systematic review and chemical assessment be viewed by other offices within the agency as really a model to adopt. Furthermore, IRIS, predominantly under the leadership of Dr. Christina Thayer, is actively contributing to and supporting the use of specialized software programs at the forefront of leading what I will call semi-automated and machine learning approaches that increase the efficiency of the systematic review process that will help to greatly reduce time and resource commitments for assessments. And I think, as we've heard in session 3, by semi-automated, we're meaning that humans are not extinct yet. We still need humans for this process. And as somebody who has done systematic review and used several of these tools, I can attest to the fact that humans are still needed and it's a lot of work still. But through some of these semi-automated learning approaches, it greatly reduces the time and the effort that's needed by people. So these software tools not only reduce time and effort commitments, but they help to ensure transparency, helping to bridge communication between IRIS and stakeholders, and increase clarity regarding the methods and criteria for selecting, evaluating, and integrating the scientific evidence of the chemical assessments. Not only will the use and further assessment of these tools benefit the IRIS program, but they can also benefit the greater environmental health community,
30 seconds.
As well as the systematic review community. And we strongly encourage IRIS to continue these efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm taking strictly enforced as a compliment. Okay, next, Eberhard Garrison from Jones, Swanson, Huddle, and Garrison.
Hello, my name is Eberhard Garrison. I'm an attorney from New Orleans. I suspect I'm the only liberal arts major in this room. So my presentation will not focus on science. Y'all got that covered. I represent a community in St. John the Baptist Parish in Louisiana. You've heard some speakers talk about this case. My goal is to provide a voice for the people in this parish, as evidenced by this map. Located in the middle of this map is, right there, is the Dinka Performance Elastomer plant. It's a neoprene plant which Dinka bought from DuPont in 2015. In December of 2015, EPA's NADA came out with a recommended yearly average upper limit threshold of 0.2 micrograms per cubic meter of chloroprene. So the EPA, in coordination with the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality, I suspect, said, where do we have most of the chloroprene emissions in the United States? And it turns out it's the Dinka Performance Elastomer plant in Laplace, Louisiana, and that neighboring community is actually Reserve, Louisiana. So that 0.2 microgram per cubic meter upper threshold was based upon the 2010 IRIS toxicological report on chloroprene. Once the EPA and the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality identified this as the largest emitter of chloroprene in the nation, they required the establishment of a fence-line air quality monitoring program. One thing I'd like to just point out, the stations, and it's hard for me to see, but this little spot right here is the 5th Ward Elementary School. This is Chad Baker Street on the west side, East St. John High School, Oshner Hospital, Acorn and Highway 44, and a levee location. So what they've done, like the term implies, is created a fence line sampling protocol so they can get results depending on whatever direction the wind is blowing. I'm going to emphasize the 5th Ward Elementary School, which is approximately 500 yards from the Dinka plant. As said, the Dinka plant emits over 100 tons of chloroprene every year. The IRIS program has determined that chloroprene is a likely carcinogen. The results of this sampling, and I'm going to use the 5th Ward Elementary School as an example, on a regular basis, the air quality sample measurements are 5, 10, 20, 50, 100 times, 200 times, 300 times the 0.2 standard for chloroprene, which EPA has determined to be a likely carcinogen. As recently as December, there was a reading at the 5th Ward Elementary School 755 times the 0.2 micrograms per cubic meter standard. We have, as Dr. Kaltofen mentioned earlier, we have some of the people in the community who have undergone urine testing, and we've found the presence of metabolites of chloroprene in the urine of every single person we tested, including children who attend the 5th Ward Elementary School. I think it's important to emphasize, at least in my layperson attorney perspective, when you look at the 2010 IRIS toxicological report on chloroprene and you look at some of the mice studies in there, they specifically analyze the presence of metabolites of chloroprene in the organs in the bodies of the mice who were found to have tumors. According to the EPA, these census tracts on here, you can see them, 708 is where Fifth Ward Elementary School is? According to EPA, the top 5 census tracts with the highest NADA estimated cancer risk nationally in Louisiana are due to DINCA. The Fifth Ward Elementary School has 776 cancers per million. It's my understanding the national average is 0.96. I'm here to just speak for the people. We appreciate the IRIS program. The people of St. John the Baptist Parish cannot compete with DINCA or DuPont with paid consultants. IRIS helps level the playing field. IRIS gives them a voice. IRIS gives them a chance to have input in the decision-making process regarding the air that they and their children breathe. I respectfully ask everybody in this room, if your child attended the Fifth Ward Elementary School, what would you prefer to rely upon in understanding the health risks of chloroprene? A non-peer-reviewed report from a paid industry consultant, or an independent peer-reviewed IRIS report conducted by the EPA? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next commenter is Tyler Smith from Earth Justice.
Good afternoon. My name is Tyler Smith. I'm a staff scientist at Earth Justice. We are the nation's largest nonprofit environmental law organization. Earth Justice represents hundreds of clients in environmental matters around the country. These include many communities that are suffering from the toxic effects of chemical exposures, and where those effects, asthma attacks, cancers, developmental disorders, have become pervasive facts of life. In many cases, the first step in addressing those effects is a risk assessment. And the first step in risk assessment is hazard evaluation. Because an IRIS evaluation is widely seen as the gold standard in hazard evaluation, the integrity of the IRIS process is paramount. IRIS currently enjoys the trust and respect of stakeholders around the world. We heard just one example of that a moment ago. And they have also made tremendous progress in implementing the recommendations that National Academies committees have made over the years. I hope this committee will recognize that progress. I also have one recommendation to make, and that is that IRIS must remain within EPA's Office of Research and Development. Some have suggested that IRIS ought to be transferred to EPA's Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention. That would be a serious mistake. It would be a mistake under any administration because OCSPP, the Chemicals Office, only regulates a subset of chemicals. These are primarily pesticides and what they choose to prioritize under the Toxic Substances Control Act, or TSCA. Now that mission is critical, but so are the missions of the Office of Air, the Office of Water, and others. It is critical that IRIS assessments reflect the priorities that multiple program offices and regional offices may have, and that it serves the need of all of the agency and stakeholders outside of the agency. Furthermore, transferring IRIS would be a serious mistake under this administration because it would place IRIS under the control of a former lobbyist for the chemical industry. Dr. Nancy Beck, who is now the Deputy Assistant Administrator of OCSPP, is the former Senior Director of the American Chemistry Council. In just 1 year, Dr. Beck has placed communities at risk by watering down risk assessment procedures under revised TSCA. She has delayed rules that would protect consumers and workers from methylene chloride, a chemical linked to dozens of deaths and many more that likely went unreported. She has delayed protections for workers and their families who are exposed to some of the most toxic pesticides on the market. And I think what is most relevant in this context is that before she came to ACC, she, in her role at the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, she personally edited IRIS assessments to change their scientific conclusions. Her job was to coordinate interagency review of the assessments, but a report by House Science Committee staff determined that she personally had demanded substantial revisions, including line edits, 2 IRIS assessments, she represented them as coming from other agencies. The committee called her actions, and I quote, deeply disturbing, or very disturbing. Now, it could not be more important that IRIS remain independent and that the integrity of its process be protected. Therefore, I encourage the committee to recommend that IRIS remain an ORD, where it can be, continue to be run by the independent scientists based there, and not be transferred to OCSPP or another entity within the agency. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll move on to our next presenter, Jenna Reed, the Center for Science and Democracy.
Good afternoon. First, I'd like to thank the National Academies of Science for the opportunity to provide this comment today. My name is Jenna Reed. I am the Science and Policy Analyst at the Center for Science and Democracy at the Union of Concerned Scientists. The Center for Science and Democracy at UCS advocates for improved transparency and integrity in our democratic institutions, especially those making science-based public policy decisions. The EPA IRIS program provides a critical scientific service to the public, offering a public searchable database with scientific analyses that inform the decisions that protect us from environmental contaminants. This office is not just important for federal policymaking, but IRIS assessments and associated toxicity values are used by state environmental and public health agencies as well as community groups to assess local risks from facilities producing chemicals across the country. This incredibly valuable program must be preserved and protected to conduct its scientific work without political interference. The EPA's authority to determine the risks posed by hazardous chemicals should not be compromised by interference from other federal agencies or industry stakeholders with vested interests in decision outcomes. This office has been targeted for political interference in the past. A 2009 U.S. Government Accountability Office report found several examples of interference from EPA political appointees, the Office of Management and Budget, and other agencies to delay or weaken IRIS assessments, including decade-long review processes for naphthalene, formaldehyde, and RDX. A fall 2017 hearing held by the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology about the integrity of IRIS failed to invite any IRIS staff to talk about the progress of the office. This year, there have been many attempts to defund the program through the appropriations process. Time and time again, the chemical industry has targeted IRIS because new assessments may lead to more stringent standards set based on the best available science on a chemical. Now there is the potential for the IRIS program to move under the jurisdiction of the TSCA program, which would limit the ability of the office to develop risk assessments for a range of industrial chemicals, instead forcing focus solely on those under TSCA's authority. IRIS assessments and their staff provide institutional knowledge and assistance not only to risk assessors within the EPA and its regional offices, but also to public health practitioners in state and local governments. It is critical that the career staff scientists that comprise the IRIS office are supported so that they can continue to be a resource for individuals making these regulatory decisions about these chemicals. This will allow for federal, state, and local decisions to be based on the best available science, using best methods for systematically evaluating that science. IRIS must continue to be housed in the Office of Research and Development, as opposed to the Policy Office at the Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention, because IRIS represents a scientific database that should be prepared by scientific experts. There is not room for political consideration in the work that IRIS staff do. The EPA's scientific integrity policy explicitly protects the agency's scientists and their work from political interference or personal motivations. Thus, NAS should consider what a potential restructuring of the program would mean for its ability to conduct scientific work free from interference. NAS has acknowledged some of IRIS's challenges in the past, including room for improvement in transparency in communicating risks and decision points to the public, and standardizing assessments, updating methodologies, and regularly training employees. In its most recent report, it found that IRIS had made impressive strides toward implementing their previous recommendations. And the EPA Science Advisory Board recently found similar results after reviewing IRIS progress. In a September 2017 letter from the chair of the EPA's SAB, the board commended the agency for its swift improvements to the IRIS program. At a time when the agency's staff is shrinking and science advisors are underutilized, the EPA needs its robust scientific staff to continue the work that has sustained stringent standards at the federal level and beyond. We expect the National Academies Committee will consider the incredibly valuable role this program plays in the EPA meeting its mission to protect human health and the environment. The healthy functioning of the IRIS program will ensure that we continue to have the data to set health protective limits for hazardous chemicals and ensure public trust that the EPA has our best interests in mind. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. And let's see, our last presenter is Keith Tolson from Geosyntec. Is he here? Well, the list does say, I believe you're still here, but perhaps not. Last chance. What? No. Okay, well, thank you to the presenters and to EPA. Believe it or not, our job is not done. And we're going to move on then to these interesting demonstrations we're going to have. Ellen is going to tell us about how we're going to do this session.
So the way we're going to work the demonstration and poster session is that the committee is going to break into 3 small groups and be led through the demonstrations. We ask the audience to allow the committee access to the demonstration so that they can get through those. You're perfectly you're invited to hover or to wait and go through the demonstration so you have more or greater access. And then we also ask that this is taking place in the West Courtyard, and that if you are just interested in having conversations with your colleagues, if you could please either use the Great Hall or the room adjoining this, that would be appreciated, because the acoustics in the courtyard are such that it will get very noisy and people will not be able to hear with lots of different conversations going on. So I'm going to turn it over to Dinesh to tell us how this is exactly going to work.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Danish Shums. I work in NCEA in the IRIS program. I think Ellen did a good job of explaining what's going to happen during the poster and demo session. There'll be 3 groups. We'll spend about 10 minutes at each demo, kind of an extended elevator pitch. And then afterwards, the committee members as well as the members of the public will have an opportunity to talk with our scientists, go back to the demo stations, check out the posters, the whole range of activities here. So so there's 10 posters, and there are 10 scientists, I believe, assigned to each one of the posters. And for each demo, there's someone who's familiar with the software at each one of the demo stations. And just for the ease of facilitating movement around the room for the committee members, we have a IRIS staff member that will be assigned to your group just to help facilitate the movements. I'll have a microphone that says 10 minutes is up, and then it'll be a rotation around the room. Following that, it'll be open for everyone to mingle and communicate with our scientists about the posters and the demos. Any questions?
Okay, well, thank you, and remember, we'll start again tomorrow at 8:30 in the morning.